educated group, that's good. Many people don't. And just a brief background. In 1961 or so, the US imposed an embargo on Cuba because they turned communist, and the Americans didn't like it for good reason, of course. They became allies of the Soviet Union. Now, since then, of course, many things have happened. There was the Vietnam War, where many American lives were lost. We had great issues with the Soviet Union, with China, with all kinds of communist and unsavory kind of countries, all of which today we are trading with, which is especially noteworthy in the case of Vietnam, where I think something like 50,000 American lives were lost. But on Cuba, there is still an embargo. Americans are not allowed to travel to Cuba unless they go through very kind of restrictive educational kind of things. It's very complicated. They cannot just buy a plane ticket and say, I go to Havana and fly. No. And many people think it's because the Cubans don't want it. No, it's the US government who is curtailing your constitutional right to travel where you then please. Now, there are many people in the US who say, rightfully, this is idiotic. Because how did, for example, communism end in Eastern Europe and in the old Soviet Union? Mainly because there was a lot of contact. I'm German, I know from East Germany, West Germany. I know that at one point there was an incredible pressure of East Germans escaping via Hungary, going on holidays in the first place to places like Hungary, which were a little bit more open, where they got in touch with people from the West and they learned about the Western ways and all the luxury goods we had, and there was contact, and the pressure was building for them to abandon communism. It became so strong that their regimes were not able to hold it anymore. Now, why didn't this work in Cuba? Before the revolution, 1959, every year, 5 to 6 million Americans went to Cuba. That was when the American population was half of what it is today. Now imagine if Americans would be allowed to travel, like they're allowed to travel to Iran, to Myanmar, to Vietnam, to China, to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia doesn't let its women drive. You're a woman in Saudi Arabia, you cannot touch the wheel of a car. Now, nobody sees a problem with traveling to Saudi Arabia. Did any of you hear of a democratic election in Saudi Arabia? Well, me neither. China. Democracy? Please. Egypt. It's a dictatorship. No problem. Go there. Spend your dollars. You're welcome. Please. But in Cuba, no. Why is that the case? It's a policy that the assistant to Colin Powell, Lawrence, I forgot his last name, once named the stupidest policy on the face of the planet. That's somebody in a very high rank. It was a very high rank in the foreign ministry. So why is this still happening? And the reason is because of a group of interested people. And these happen to be Cuban exiles, but not any Cuban exiles, very wealthy people. They had to leave Cuba under Castro. They had big lands, big haciendas, sugar factories, what have you. And these were expropriated. Of course, that's not correct. But they have the idea that they can only assure that they get top dollar for everything they lost if they call the shots in Cuba. So what they do is they pay off, they contribute to campaign finance of senators, of congressmen, and very, so that they keep the embargo in place against better knowledge, against pressure from all kinds of industries, the airline industry, the hotel industry, the insurance industry, the banking industry, and lots of people in government as well, in the foreign ministry. They know this is all stupid, but you cannot fight dollars, so they keep this policy in place. They went so far as to pass legislation which is called the Freedom Act, Helms-Burton, which specifically says that nobody is ever going to be traveling to Cuba, let's say in general terms, free as a tourist, not all this educational complications, just free. There will be, the embargo will stay in place until not only there will be free elections in Cuba, but also until both Castros are gone, out of the picture, not part of any government. I mean, a whole laundry list of conditions. It's going to be very difficult for this list to be fulfilled in our lifetimes. And this is a policy that is clearly counterproductive. Anybody with a minimal amount of intelligence knows that by doing this, we keep giving the Castros and this regime a reason, an excuse for all the mistakes that they're making, for all the misery they're imposing on their own people. If you take this away, you have 5 million, 8 million, 10 million, whatever it's going to be, Americans travel there every year. They will lose control. And they know. Castro once admitted to Aznar, the ex-Spanish prime minister, he said, I need, that's what Aznar wrote in his autobiography, he said, I need the embargo in place, Castro told, for this generation, the next generation, and one round. Okay? But these are things which nobody listens to. So my fervent wish, I am coveting the moment that these guys who are holding up against the interests of the American people, against the interests of the Cuban people, who are holding up progress and respect, that they lose their power, that somehow there's a sudden explosion of common sense, and all of this is destined to the wastebasket of history. And finally, the Cuban people will be able to say, Viva Cuba Libre! Long live Cuba!